let's just step back and see why SCO is so important at this point in time, and why did our Prime Minister decide to go to China for this particular SCO summit. Is because there has been a disruption in global trade, to put it very, very bluntly, which everybody is aware of. And therefore, till now, we have been working on, from an economic perspective, the theory of China plus one, where we need to have supply chain resilience, because during COVID, China had cut off a lot of supplies to not just India, but to the rest of the world. Even as recently as last month, they were still putting a choke on critical minerals, on rare earth magnets, on things like germanium tetrachloride, which is important for our fiber optic industry, for our telecom industry. So there has been a lot of chokes, and therefore we were looking at, and the rest of the world was looking at, a China plus one strategy. And clearly India was kind of fitting into that China plus one strategy. Now what we see is that instead of the supply side being an issue, the demand side has suddenly become an issue with the US administration putting in the tariffs. So now we are looking at a US plus one strategy, that let's not put all our baskets from a demand perspective into the US, which is one of the largest markets on this planet, and therefore can we look at alternate markets. When we're looking at alternate markets, there are issues which needs to be resolved, issues such as terrorism that needs to be acknowledged. You cannot have people whose hands are dripping in terrorist blood, and they are sitting across the table as equals, and that is not acceptable. And therefore, SCO had those problems, which is why it was important that we straighten out that part, which is what happened with our Prime Minister talking about the issue of terrorism that needs to be acknowledged by everybody. If you recollect, in the last SCO, our Defense Minister refused to sign the joint declaration because it spoke about terrorism in Balochistan, but had no mention of the dastardly act that happened in Pahalgam, where 26 innocent tourists were killed based on their faith and based on whatever else, but pure act of terrorism which was sponsored by a state actor. So it was a state-driven terrorism, and that needs to be straightened out before we can really have any other meaningful conversation. On the point that that the deficit between India and China has gone up, but we also need to keep in mind that the exports from India to China has also significantly gone up, and therefore the big hole that India has seen in terms of exports to US, which is about $40 to $45 billion, depending on how we calculate it. It is important that we find out alternate markets for that $45 billion hole to be fixed up. Some of it could be domestic, which is what our government has done by reducing the GST so that consumption goes up, so that some of the things that were meant for the US market can get consumed in the domestic market. But that will still not be enough. So we need to start working on multiple such initiatives. And the SCO summit is clearly one of those initiatives.
Bhattacharya, do you agree really time for India to reflect that, look, we are in that driving seat, long-term investments really should be key, as Mitali was mentioning? Do you agree that really was somewhere, also what Prime Minister Modi, has intended to do with, of course, his significant voice at the summit? Sir, I think you've muted yourself.
Right. No, so absolutely, yes, I completely agree with what Mitali said. It's important to have the investments in, but also the other point that Mitali mentioned about what all the US has allowed. It has allowed electronics to come in because that's important for them for whatever reason. They've also allowed barytes to come in because that's critical for their oil and gas industry. and India is the largest supplier of baryte. If we stop supplying barytes, the US oil and gas industry will come down to its knees, pretty similar to the effect that happened when China stopped supply of rare earth magnets. Are we going to do that? That's not what we're suggesting. But the point is that there are multiple leverages besides investments that India has. And if others can use, using the US language, their cards, then we can also use our cards. And there are multiple such cards that exist. It depends on how open are we to use these cards. And also, the fact is that we are not here for our ego. our politicians are not in Shanghai or wherever else because of ego. They're here to solve a problem. They're here to ensure that our businesses are protected, our jobs for our people is protected, and therefore, can we find an alternate to the US market? As I said, it's not just US plus one, but US plus many. If you look at the larger picture, the combined economy of the member countries of SCO is still smaller than the size of the US economy. So that's the kind of difference we're talking about. Even though it represents 42% of the global population, it's still not there in terms of being an alternate to the US economy. Also, the US weakening down is not something that's in India's interest. What's in India's interest will also keep changing. As I've mentioned in other channels, that just like in domestic politics, there are no permanent friends and no permanent enemies. Similarly, in geopolitics, there is no permanent friends and no permanent enemies. It's our national interest which is important, and even that keeps changing. What's of national interest today will change tomorrow, and we need to have the ability and the autonomy to ensure that the will of our government is enforced, and that what's good for our country is taken forward in an amicable manner. Till now, we have been talking about platforms and organizations which are rule based, and we have been participating in it with great vigor, have been in the United Nations with great vigor. But you look at the kind of structure we have in UN. The largest country in the world is not even in the permanent member of the United Nations. The fourth largest economy in the world is not a permanent member of the United Nations. So obviously these are rule-based order, but the rules are not ours. And therefore, as the SCO starts getting crafted, it's still not a mature organization. It's still, I would say, in its teenage kind of a place. We need to ensure that the rules are aligned for what is in our interest. Now, if you look at the member countries, they are largely member countries which are neighboring China or member countries which are encircling India. Those are two different terms. They perhaps represent the same thing, but they've got different implications. And therefore, you see the SCO clearly has been crafted in China's interest, and that's what any nation will do. If they have taken up an initiative, they will craft that platform as per their interest. Therefore, it's important for India to make sure that that platform also supports India's interests. Till the time it does, India will be part of it. The day this platform stops supporting India's interests, India will not be will not be part of this platform. And Rajnath Singh's walking away, not signing that agreement, or Ajit Doval's walking away because a wrong map was shown. I think those show what is the strategic intent that India has. We will be part of this as long as it serves an interest. The day it stops serving our interest, we will not be part of this.
Absolutely.